At midnight, he found her sleeping in the hayloft, and everything changed. Daniel Mercer had always been a light sleeper, though he never minded it much. Living alone on the old family farm in rural Ohio had taught him to be alert. The farmhouse creaked with every gust of wind, the wooden floorboards whispered under his own steps, and the distant calls of animals at night could sometimes make a man feel uneasy. But he had grown used to it. 42 years of life in this quiet place had made him familiar with every sound, every shadow, and every tiny movement in the fields surrounding his home. That night, however, was different. It began like any other night. Daniel finished his late supper quietly, washed the dishes, and sat by the fireplace for a while, listening to the rain tapping softly against the windows. He liked nights like this, peaceful, calm, nothing to disturb the mind. The flickering light from the fireplace cast shadows across the walls, making the small living room feel cozy. His mind wandered to memories of the past, his parents working in the fields, the smell of fresh hay in summer, and the laughter of visitors that rarely came now. By 11, Daniel had gone to bed, expecting nothing more than a quiet night. But as soon as he laid his head on the pillow, he felt it, a subtle disturbance in the calm. At first, he thought it might be the wind sneaking through a small crack in the old wooden walls. He listened for a moment, willing the noise to be nothing more than imagination. The farm had its usual sounds at night, a horse shifting in the stall, a distant owl, the occasional rustle of a field mouse. But this time, something didn't feel right. It was faint at first, a soft thud, then silence. Daniel froze in his bed, straining to hear. His mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation. Maybe a loose board in the barn, perhaps a branch hitting the side of the house. His rational side whispered that it was nothing serious, but his instincts, honed by years of living alone, told him otherwise. Something was different, something unusual. He swung his legs off the bed and stood, the wooden floor cold beneath his bare feet. The old clock on his dresser ticked loudly in the quiet room, each second feeling heavier than the last. Daniel rubbed his eyes and took a deep breath. Maybe it was just the house settling, he told himself. Maybe it was nothing at all. But curiosity and caution pushed him to check. He pulled on his worn boots, the leather soft from years of use, and grabbed a flashlight from the small shelf by the door. The night outside was cold, crisp, and still. The moon hung low and pale, casting silver light over the fields, making the crops glimmer like a calm sea. The farmhouse looked peaceful, almost innocent under the moonlight. But the barn seemed different. It stood about 30 yards away, shadowy and silent, its wooden walls dark against the pale moon. Daniel's heart began to beat faster as he walked across the yard. Each step on the dewy grass felt heavier than the last. The barn door was slightly open. Daniel paused. He was certain he had locked it before coming inside earlier that evening. A chill ran down his spine. He didn't rush forward. Instead, he approached slowly, listening. The night was quiet, except for the occasional hoot of an owl in the distance. Every instinct in him screamed caution. Daniel pushed the door gently. The hinges groaned softly and the sound echoed across the empty barn. The smell hit him immediately, a mix of old hay, horses, and earth. It was familiar and comforting, yet tonight it carried a strange, foreign undertone. The horses were calm, standing quietly in their stalls, not making a sound. Daniel's flashlight beam swept across the barn's interior, cutting through the darkness, revealing stacks of hay bales, old tools, and dusty shadows. And then he heard it, a faint, almost imperceptible breathing. It didn't belong to the horses. It was coming from above the hayloft. Daniel's heart raced. He climbed the ladder slowly, each wooden rung creaking under his weight. The flashlight shook slightly in his hand, though he tried to keep it steady. The beam moved across the stacked hay, illuminating shadows that seemed to dance with every movement. And then it stopped. There, nestled between the bales, was a young girl. She appeared to be no older than 15. Her clothes were dusty, tangled, and worn. Her hair was messy, falling across her face. She clutched a small backpack tightly to her chest, as if it were her only possession in the world. She was asleep, or at least she had been until Daniel's light found her. Daniel froze. His mind raced, trying to comprehend what he was seeing. This was not a thief. This was not an intruder. This was a child. And he realized with a sudden, undeniable clarity that everything he thought about that night about the sound in the barn had changed in an instant. He spoke softly, carefully, trying not to startle her. "Hey, it's okay." The girl's eyes snapped open. Fear filled them wide and sharp like a deer caught in headlights. She tried to sit up, pressing her back against the wooden wall as if it were a shield. Her small body trembled. Daniel lowered the flashlight and took a small step back. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said gently, his voice calm and even. "You're safe here." For a long moment, neither spoke. Daniel could feel her fear, the way it radiated in the tense lines of her body and the way she clutched the backpack. He didn't rush her. He knew better than that. Some wounds, even those we cannot see, need time before they trust. Finally, she whispered, her voice barely audible, "Please don't call anyone." Her words struck him like a sudden gust of cold air. Daniel noticed her hands shaking. Her eyes darted around the loft, as if searching for an escape, as if the world itself might suddenly turn against her. She looked exhausted, as though she had been running for days, though she barely spoke. He didn't press. He simply nodded, letting her know he had heard her. "What's your name?" he asked softly. "Maya," she said almost reluctantly. Daniel nodded again. "I'm Daniel. This is my farm. You're safe here, but I need to know, are you okay?" She hesitated before giving the slightest nod. That was all he needed to know for now. He sensed her story was complex, filled with details she wasn't ready to share. And that was okay. Daniel had learned a long time ago that people revealed their pain in their own time. He looked at her, thinking about the choice before him. He could call the authorities immediately, as most people would, and force the situation into the cold, structured world of rules and reports. Or he could listen to his heart. He could offer a safe space, warmth, and patience until she was ready to take the next steps. After a long pause, Daniel said, "Come inside, you need a warm meal, you must be hungry." Maya looked at him warily. For a moment, Daniel wondered if she would run. But slowly, cautiously, she followed him down the ladder. She kept her eyes on him, but she obeyed. The farmhouse felt warm compared to the chill of the night. The fireplace cast a golden glow across the room, making the walls seem alive with light. Daniel prepared a small bowl of soup and a piece of bread, careful not to overwhelm her. He placed it on the table in front of her. She stared at it, unsure if it was safe, before taking a small sip, and then another. And soon she was eating as if she had been starving for days. Daniel watched silently. He understood the importance of patience. Trust couldn't be forced. He didn't bombard her with questions or demands. He simply provided what she needed most in that moment: safety, warmth, and calm. Outside, the storm continued to pass, the wind dying down and the moon returning to full strength in the sky. Inside, the farmhouse was quiet, filled only with the sound of soft eating, the occasional crackle from the fireplace, and the steady breathing of a girl slowly beginning to relax. Daniel knew that this was only the beginning. The night had started with a soft thud in the barn, a noise that had drawn him outside. But now, as he watched Maya eat quietly, he realized that he hadn't just discovered a sound. He had discovered someone who needed him. And in that moment, he understood something deep in his heart. Life had a strange way of changing in an instant. One night, one sound, one unexpected encounter could shift everything. And this night, Daniel knew, would be remembered forever. Because sometimes, the quietest noises in the dark lead to the most important discoveries in life. Maya sat at the kitchen table, clutching her small backpack tightly, her eyes wide and alert. Every sound from the farmhouse, the creak of the floorboards, the faint whistle of wind through the cracks, even the soft bubbling of the soup on the stove, made her flinch slightly. She had spent the last 2 days running, hiding, and staying quiet. She had learned to be careful, to never trust anyone too quickly. And yet, here was Daniel, standing calmly a few feet away, speaking in soft, patient words that somehow felt safe, even when her instincts screamed otherwise. Daniel placed the bowl of soup in front of her carefully. Steam rose from the warm liquid, carrying the scent of herbs and vegetables. Maya stared at it, unsure whether to take a sip. Her stomach churned with nerves, but also with hunger. She had eaten very little since leaving home, only small scraps she could find along the way. This simple meal, so ordinary for someone like Daniel, felt almost magical to her. "Go ahead," Daniel said softly. "It's okay. You're safe now. Just eat." She hesitated, her small fingers hovering above the bowl. Slowly, she picked up the spoon and took a tiny sip. The warmth spread through her chest, and a shiver ran down her spine, not from the cold, but from relief. She hadn't realized how cold and hungry she had been until now. The first sip was followed by another, and soon she was eating a little more confidently, though still cautiously. Daniel watched her quietly, giving her space. He didn't force questions. He didn't ask where she came from or why she was there. He knew that trust, once broken or threatened, took time to rebuild. She needed time. She needed someone who wouldn't push, someone who would let her breathe in her own time. After a few minutes, Maya put down her spoon and looked up at him, her dark eyes flickering with a mixture of fear and curiosity. Daniel gave her a small, reassuring smile. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Maya," she whispered, almost as if speaking too loudly might shatter the fragile safety she felt. Daniel nodded. "I'm Daniel, you're safe here, you don't have to be afraid." She didn't speak again, but her eyes told him everything he needed to know. She was cautious, but she wanted to believe him. For the next hour, they sat quietly. Daniel cleaned up the dishes while Maya watched, occasionally glancing at the warm fire. The house, once silent and lonely, began to feel more alive. He thought about how strange it was that a single night, a single unexpected event, could change the rhythm of a life so completely. Finally, Daniel decided it was time to show her the rest of the house. "Do you want to see where you can sleep?" he asked. Maya's eyes widened. She wasn't used to kindness. She wasn't used to being offered anything. But something in Daniel's tone made her nod slowly. He led her to a small guest room at the back of the farmhouse. The room was simple, just a bed with a clean blanket, a small dresser, and a window overlooking the fields. But to Maya, it felt like a palace. She walked in cautiously, as if stepping onto sacred ground. Daniel didn't rush her. He simply watched, giving her space to settle in. "You can sleep here tonight," he said softly. "No one will bother you." Maya nodded again, almost too timidly to notice. She set her backpack on the floor and sank onto the bed, hugging the blanket to her chest. Daniel turned to leave, but then paused at the doorway. "If you need anything at all, just call me. I'll be nearby." Maya nodded once more, and this time there was a tiny spark of trust in her eyes. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He lay awake in his own bed, thinking about the girl he had found in the hayloft. Who was she? Why had she been out there alone? What had made her run? And yet, more than the questions, there was a deep sense of responsibility settling over him. He had found her when she needed help the most, and he couldn't ignore that. Maya, meanwhile, lay on the bed, her mind racing. She wasn't used to kindness, and yet she felt it here in this old farmhouse. She thought of the past 2 days, the fear, the running, the constant need to hide. And now here she was in a warm bed, safe, with someone who hadn't judged her or asked her to explain herself. Slowly, exhaustion overtook her, and she drifted into a fitful sleep, the blanket wrapped tightly around her. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the window, bathing the room in golden light. Maya woke slowly, the events of the night before replaying in her mind. She felt a strange mixture of relief and fear. Relief because she had survived the night safely. Fear because she didn't know what would come next. She got up quietly, still unsure if Daniel was awake, and stepped into the kitchen. Daniel was already there making breakfast. The smell of eggs and toast filled the small room. When he saw her, he smiled warmly. "Good morning," he said gently. "Sleep well?" Maya nodded, still shy, still cautious. She wasn't used to people asking simple questions like that without ulterior motives. Daniel noticed her hesitation but didn't press. He knew trust had to grow slowly. They ate breakfast in silence at first. Daniel let her set the pace, letting her feel comfortable without pressure. Eventually, Maya started to speak in small fragments, telling him tiny pieces of her story. She didn't go into detail, didn't talk about why she had left or where she had been. But she did mention that she had nowhere else to go, that she had been scared, and that she didn't want to return to a place that had made her feel small and invisible. Daniel listened carefully, nodding occasionally. He didn't interrupt. He didn't offer solutions too quickly. He knew the importance of simply being present, of letting someone feel heard without feeling judged. Over the next few days, the routine settled into something comforting. Maya helped with small chores around the house, sweeping the floor, feeding the chickens, gathering eggs from the coop. Daniel noticed how cautious she was at first, moving as if she might break something or draw too much attention. But slowly, she became more confident, more relaxed. She laughed quietly when a chicken pecked at her sleeve, and Daniel smiled, feeling warmth spread through him that he hadn't felt in years. During the afternoons, they would walk in the fields. Daniel showed her the small stream nearby, the patches of wildflowers, and the tall oak tree where he used to sit as a boy. He didn't force conversation, but he asked gentle questions, encouraging her to speak if she wanted. Maya began to open up little by little, sharing memories of places she had visited, books she liked, and her favorite animals. Each small detail was a bridge, connecting her to the world she had withdrawn from. Daniel also noticed her strengths. She was careful, observant, and smart. She learned quickly which plants were safe to touch, how to handle the animals, and how to help without getting in the way. He admired her resilience, the way she had survived on her own for days, navigating a world that had not been kind to her. One evening, after a long day of chores, they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the fields. The sky was painted with shades of orange, pink, and purple. Maya leaned back in the chair, the first real sign of relaxation Daniel had seen. "It's beautiful here," she said softly. Daniel nodded, smiling. "It's peaceful. I think you needed to see that." She looked at him, and for the first time, Daniel saw a glimmer of trust in her eyes. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. She had begun to believe that she could be safe, that someone could care for her without expecting anything in return. That night, as they prepared for bed, Daniel made a decision. He would contact a local social worker he trusted, someone kind and patient who could help guide Maya safely through the next steps. But he wouldn't force her. He would do it in a way that respected her fears, her choices, and her growing trust. Maya went to sleep that night feeling a little lighter. She had not just found shelter, she had found someone who saw her, not as a problem, not as a burden, but as a person who mattered. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to breathe a little easier, to hope that maybe, just maybe, things could get better. Daniel stayed awake longer, thinking about the strange twist of fate that had brought her to his barn. He had expected to hear nothing more than the quiet night air, perhaps the sound of a raccoon or a loose board in the barn. Instead, he had found a girl in need of help, a life that was waiting for a chance to be safe. And he knew that the days ahead would not be easy, but they would be worth it. Because sometimes, the quietest moments, the softest noises in the dark, lead to the most profound changes. And Daniel and Maya's lives had already begun to change forever. The days passed slowly but comfortably. Daniel and Maya settled into a quiet rhythm, one that felt both natural and healing. Every morning, Daniel would rise early, as he always had, and go out to check on the animals. The horses were always the first to greet him, nuzzling his hands as he patted their muzzles. Maya began following him, initially hesitant, staying a few steps behind as she watched him move with ease and confidence around the animals. She learned quickly, realizing that every sound, every gesture, and every small habit mattered when you were working with living creatures. At first, she was cautious. She watched the chickens peck at the ground, careful not to startle them. She learned which bales of hay were stacked safely and which ones might topple if she wasn't careful. But slowly, she began to participate, lifting small buckets of water, gathering eggs, and feeding the horses with gentle hands. Daniel noticed how quickly she adapted and how her natural curiosity and care made her a quick learner. During those early mornings, Daniel and Maya often walked silently, side by side, across the dew-soaked fields. Words were not always necessary. Sometimes the sound of the wind rustling through the corn, the crow of a distant rooster, or the distant hum of crickets was enough to fill the space between them. And yet in those quiet moments a connection was forming, a bond built not on words but on trust, understanding, and shared experience. One morning, Daniel finally broke the silence. "Do you like it here?" he asked gently, watching Maya carefully. She paused, considering the question. She had been cautious every day, always ready to run if something felt wrong. But now, standing in the sunlit field, holding a bucket of water for the horses, she felt a small, unfamiliar warmth in her chest. "Yes," she whispered finally. "It feels safe." Daniel nodded, smiling. That one word, safe, was more than he could have hoped for. It meant that she had begun to let go of some of her fear. She was starting to trust him, and that was the first step toward real healing. As the days turned into weeks, Maya's confidence grew. She began helping more in the house, learning small skills that Daniel had always done alone. She swept the floor, washed dishes, and even learned to cook simple meals. Daniel encouraged her, giving guidance when needed, but allowing her to make mistakes and learn from them. He never corrected her harshly, never raised his voice, and never made her feel like she had to be perfect. One afternoon while feeding the chickens, Maya laughed for the first time. A small, unexpected sound that seemed to surprise even her. One of the chickens had pecked her sleeve, and she had jumped back, half startled, half amused. Daniel chuckled from where he was filling the water trough. "See," he said gently, "life has its small surprises." Maya's laughter was soft at first, almost shy, but it grew as she realized that no one was judging her. That laugh became a turning point, a sign that she was starting to relax and enjoy the simple, ordinary joys of life that she had been denied for so long. As the bond between them strengthened, Daniel noticed subtle changes in Maya. She moved more freely, spoke more openly, and began sharing small pieces of her past. Not everything, she still had her walls, but enough to show that she was beginning to feel safe in his presence. She told him about small memories from school, about her favorite books, and about animals she had loved as a child. Each story, no matter how small, was a thread weaving her into a new life. Daniel, in turn, shared his own stories, not to overshadow hers, but to create a sense of connection. He spoke of his parents, of summers spent in the fields, of small adventures in the woods near the farm. He told her about his late wife, and though the memories brought sadness, he shared them with honesty, showing Maya that life could hold both pain and joy. One rainy afternoon, they sat by the fireplace together. The storm outside rattled the windows and tapped against the roof, but inside, the farmhouse felt cozy and secure. Maya held a small cup of cocoa in her hands, and Daniel watched her quietly. The silence was comfortable, filled with the sounds of rain and the soft crackle of the fire. "You're very brave," Daniel said finally, his voice gentle. Maya looked up, surprised. "Brave?" she asked, uncertain. "Yes," he replied. "It takes courage to leave a place that hurts you, to find your way through the unknown, and to trust someone new. You've done that." Maya looked down at her cup, her cheeks slightly flushed. She didn't know what to say. She had always been careful, always hiding her feelings, always trying to survive. And yet, here was someone who saw her courage, who acknowledged it without asking for anything in return. Over the next few weeks, Daniel and Maya developed small routines that brought comfort and predictability to their days. They would rise early, feed the animals, prepare breakfast, and then spend the morning working together in the fields or the barn. Afternoons were often spent reading, drawing, or exploring the farm. Evenings were for quiet conversation or simply watching the sunset from the porch. These routines, simple as they were, became anchors in Maya's life, proof that stability and safety could exist, even after days of fear and uncertainty. Daniel also began teaching her practical skills. He showed her how to mend fences, identify plants, and care for animals. He encouraged her to ask questions and make decisions, helping her build confidence and self-reliance. Maya responded eagerly, absorbing the lessons with a mix of determination and curiosity. She was learning not just how to survive, but how to live. One afternoon, while walking near the stream that ran along the edge of the farm, Maya paused and looked out at the flowing water. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "I didn't know there were places like this." Daniel smiled. "There's more than one kind of beauty," he said. "Some you can see, some you can feel. Sometimes the hardest moments show you the most." Maya thought about that as they walked in silence, the gentle babble of the stream accompanying them. She realized that life didn't always have to be frightening, that there could be moments of calm and peace even after days of fear. And for the first time in a long time, she felt hope. As trust grew, so did their conversations. Maya slowly shared memories of her family, not the painful ones, but the small, cherished moments she still remembered fondly. She spoke of her favorite books, the songs she liked, and the dreams she had once held. Daniel listened, offering encouragement and understanding without judgment. He was patient, giving her the space to open up at her own pace. One evening, after finishing chores, Daniel sat on the porch, watching the sky turn shades of orange and purple. Maya joined him, carrying a small notebook and pencil. She had begun writing, sketching scenes from the farm, and Daniel admired her quiet determination. "You're very talented," he said softly. Maya blushed. "I didn't think anyone would care," she admitted. "I care," Daniel said. "What you think and what you create matters." That night, as they went inside, Daniel felt a quiet sense of pride and fulfillment. He had not only provided shelter and safety, but he had begun to help a young girl find her own voice and strength. And in return, he found a renewed sense of purpose. The farmhouse, once quiet and lonely, now hummed with life and connection. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months. Maya's confidence grew steadily. She no longer flinched at every sound, no longer hesitated when asked to help. She laughed more freely, spoke more openly, and even began planning small projects around the farm. Daniel continued to guide her, offering support and encouragement without forcing her beyond her comfort zone. One afternoon, while repairing a fence, Maya looked up at Daniel and said softly, "I feel happy here. I feel like I belong." Daniel felt a lump in his throat. "You do belong," he said firmly, "and I'm glad you're here." Maya smiled, a small but genuine smile that reached her eyes. It was a sign that she had begun to heal, that she had begun to trust not just Daniel but herself, and the possibility of a life that was safe and full of hope. That night, as they prepared for bed, Daniel reflected on the changes he had witnessed. The girl he had found frightened and alone in the hayloft had grown into someone who could smile, laugh, and dream again. It was not magic, nor was it instant. It was patience, care, and the quiet, consistent presence of someone who refused to let fear define her life. Maya, lying in her small bed, thought about the days that had passed. She had learned to trust, to hope, and to believe that kindness could exist even in a world that had often been cruel. And for the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future, a life where she could be safe, loved, and valued. The bond between Daniel and Maya had become strong, built on trust, patience, and small acts of kindness. Neither spoke of it as extraordinary, but both felt the deep impact of their connection. The quiet farmhouse, the soft rustle of leaves in the wind, the gentle morning light, all of it had become a sanctuary, a place where two lives that had been touched by fear and loss could begin to heal. And in that quiet, ordinary life, Daniel and Maya found something extraordinary: hope, trust, and a sense of belonging that neither had expected to find. Months passed, and the small farmhouse on the edge of the fields had transformed. It was no longer just a quiet home for Daniel Mercer. It had become a place of warmth, hope, and life. The days followed a comforting rhythm. Sunlight spilled over the farm in the mornings, birds called from the trees, and the animals greeted both Daniel and Maya with familiarity and affection. What had begun as a single midnight encounter in the hayloft had grown into a life filled with small joys and routines that brought peace to both of them. Maya had changed in ways that Daniel had only hoped for. She moved through the farmhouse and farm with confidence, her head held a little higher, her laughter more frequent, and her eyes carrying a quiet spark of happiness that had not been there when he first found her. She had begun attending school again, encouraged by Daniel and the kind social worker he had contacted weeks earlier. The girl who had once hidden from the world now carried herself like someone who belonged, someone whose voice mattered. Daniel watched her often, quietly, with a mixture of pride and gentle awe. It was not his place to claim her victories, but he could not help feeling that her growth had somehow become part of his own life as well. The loneliness that had once filled the farmhouse seemed to have lifted, replaced by a sense of purpose he had not felt in years. One bright morning, as the sun rose over the fields, Daniel and Maya walked along the narrow path that led to the stream. The grass glistened with dew, and the air carried the fresh scent of spring. Birds chirped, and the gentle hum of bees moving from flower to flower filled the silence with life. Maya paused, taking a deep breath and letting the morning surround her. "It feels different here," she said softly. Daniel smiled. "Different good or different bad?" he asked, curiosity in his voice. "Different good," she said, a small smile tugging at her lips. "It feels like I can breathe, like I can be myself." Daniel nodded, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. He had never expected that a chance encounter in the barn could lead to something so meaningful. It was not about fixing everything or solving every problem. It was about giving her space, patience, and understanding. That he realized had made all the difference. Back at the farmhouse, their days continued with small tasks and routines. They fed the animals, tended the garden, cooked meals together, and sometimes just sat quietly by the fireplace. But each day, they also shared moments of laughter, conversation, and reflection. Daniel noticed the subtle ways Maya was learning to trust herself as much as she trusted him. She offered suggestions about chores, asked questions about the farm, and even helped plan small improvements to the fields. She had become an active participant in the life of the farm, no longer just a visitor in someone else's world. One afternoon, as they repaired a section of the fence that had been damaged by the wind, Daniel looked at her thoughtfully. "You've grown a lot," he said. Maya paused, wiping the sweat from her brow. "I guess I have," she said almost shyly. I never thought I could do these things, but I can. You can, Daniel said firmly. You're capable of more than you realize, and I'll always be here to help you when you need it, but I also want you to try on your own. Maya nodded, feeling a sense of pride in her chest. For the first time, she believed in her own abilities. She was no longer just surviving, she was living. Over the next few weeks, Daniel helped her navigate the official steps that were necessary for her future. She met with the social worker, who guided her through school enrollment, safety plans, and the legal process to ensure that she would have a stable home. Daniel was present every step of the way, supporting her but never pushing. He respected her pace, allowing her to make decisions that were comfortable and safe for her. Maya found herself slowly letting go of the fears that had haunted her for years. She trusted that Daniel would not abandon her, that she could have a home, a family, and a life that was full of care and kindness. This trust was not instantaneous. It had been built slowly, day by day, with small gestures, shared meals, gentle guidance, and the consistency of someone who refused to let fear rule her world. One evening, nearly a year after Daniel had first found her in the hayloft, Maya asked to climb the ladder to the barn again. Daniel followed her, curious, as she led the way to the loft where she had slept that first night. The hayloft looked the same: dusty beams, stacked hay bales, the faint smell of straw, but to Maya it had changed entirely in meaning. She stood in the middle of the loft, her small hands brushing against the hay. "I remember the night I first came here," she said softly. "I was so scared I thought no one could help me." Daniel stood behind her quietly. "But someone did," he said gently. "Yes," she said, looking at him, tears brimming in her eyes. "You did. You didn't push me away. You didn't judge me. You gave me hope." Daniel felt his throat tighten. He had never expected that one night in the barn would lead to this moment, this deep, unspoken understanding between two lives that had been changed forever. "You had the courage already," he said softly. "I just helped you see it." Maya looked around the loft again, her eyes taking in the space that had once felt cold, frightening, and empty. Now it felt like the place where her life had truly begun. The hayloft was no longer a place of fear. It was a symbol of new beginnings, of trust, and of the bond she shared with Daniel. From that day forward, the farmhouse and farm carried a new meaning for both of them. They were no longer just a place to live, they were home. Daniel found a renewed sense of purpose in caring for Maya, guiding her, and simply being present. And Maya discovered something she had never experienced before: the knowledge that she mattered, that she could be safe, and that she could dream of a future without fear. Life, of course, was not perfect. There were challenges, small setbacks, and moments of doubt. But now Maya faced them with a sense of strength she had never had before. Daniel was there to support her, to encourage her, and to offer guidance when needed. But the most important change was in Maya herself. She had begun to trust herself, to believe in her own ability to navigate the world safely and confidently. One sunny afternoon, as they worked together to plant new vegetables in the garden, Maya paused and looked up at Daniel. "I never thought I'd be happy again," she said softly. "But I really am." Daniel smiled, feeling a deep warmth in his chest. "I'm glad," he said simply. "You deserve it." They continued working in the garden, side by side, their movements synchronized like they had done this together for years. The farm was alive with sunlight, the scent of fresh soil, and the gentle sounds of animals in the distance. For Daniel, the small moments, Maya laughing when a chicken pecked at her hat, her excitement at planting seeds, the way she carefully watered the garden, were proof that trust, care, and patience could truly transform lives. That night, as they sat on the porch watching the stars appear one by one, Maya rested her head on her knees and looked up at the sky. "I never believed in happy endings," she whispered. Daniel turned to her and said softly, "Sometimes happy endings don't come all at once. They come slowly, one small moment at a time, and sometimes they come when you least expect them, like at midnight in a hayloft." Maya smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. She remembered that night, the fear, the uncertainty, the loneliness, and she realized how far she had come. She had found safety, trust, and a life worth living. And Daniel, who had stumbled upon her by chance, had found a new purpose, a family he never expected to have, and a chance to make a real difference in someone's life. From that night onward, the barn, the farmhouse, and the fields became a place of healing, hope, and connection. The wind still whispered through the cracks in the old house. The animals still greeted them each morning. and the sun rose and set in its familiar rhythm. But for Daniel and Maya, every day carried the quiet knowledge that they had changed each other's lives forever. They knew that life could still be unpredictable, that challenges could arise, and that fear might visit again. But they also knew something stronger. They had each other, and together they could face whatever came their way. The barn, once a place of fear and uncertainty, now stood as a symbol of new beginnings. The hayloft, where Maya had hidden that first night, had become the place where her life truly started. And the farmhouse, filled with laughter, warmth, and care, had become a home in every sense of the word. Daniel and Maya learned that sometimes, the smallest sounds in the dark, the faintest cries for help, could lead to the most profound changes. They had found each other when they needed it most, and in the process, both their lives had been transformed. Fear had been replaced with trust, loneliness with companionship, and uncertainty with hope. And so the quiet farm in rural Ohio became more than just land and buildings. It became a testament to the power of kindness, patience, and human connection. A place where two lives, once full of fear and solitude, could grow, heal, and thrive together. Maya often looked back at that night in the hayloft and smiled softly. She had been scared, alone, and unsure of the future. But now she knew that night had been the beginning of everything. The night she was found, cared for, and given a chance. And Daniel, who had heard the faint sound in the dark and chosen to follow it, had given both of them a life they never imagined possible. Because sometimes, the world surprises you in the quietest ways, and sometimes, one small act of kindness can change everything. And in that farmhouse, with the soft rustle of the wind and the gentle light of the morning sun, Daniel and Maya knew, without needing to say it aloud, that everything had truly changed. Forever.